Pirate King, a shipwreck, a festival gone off the rails. Stay tuned.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. All right, here's today's interview. My guest today is the award-winning game designer and writer behind the Molten Sulfur blog, Tristan Zimmerman. Tristan, welcome to the show, man.
Matt, always a delight to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. It is always a treat when you come on the show and we can talk about these historical situations or events that we can use in our RPG campaigns. And of course, I guess just really quickly, your game Shanty Hunters racked up some awards and everything. So congrats on all of that. I am sure they are well-deserved.
Thank you. Yeah, I just won an Indie Spotlight Award at the 2022 Ennies, and I am up for two possible Indie Groundbreaker Awards. I got nominated for Most Innovative and Game of the Year. So we find out in 8 days from this recording if I picked up either of those. But it's super duper exciting. And if you, the listener at home, want to learn more about Shanty Hunters, you can Google Shanty Hunters RPG. It's my tabletop RPG about collecting magical sea shanties in the year 1880 and singing them with your friends around the gaming table.
And yes, this will, of course, air after the award ceremony, so I may have to change that to multi-award-winning game designer. So there you go. But just really cool to see you racking up some awards for your innovative game designs. Well, anyway, kind of keeping with our normal format of the show, we're going to look at some interesting events from history. We're going to take a look at the Pirate King of Iceland, which just sounds so cool. We're also going to look at a disastrous game. But first, we're going to take a look at a shipwreck, aren't we?
Yeah, so just to keep you guys on the edges of your seats at home, we're trying to invert the format a little bit this time. We're seeing, because we always go super long in the first segment and have to super compress the last segment. This time, I'm going to see if we can compress compress the first segment and let the last segment run long. So we'll see how that goes. But this is in 1835. It's the wreck of the British convict ship George III. Which went down off the coast of Tasmania. And what's interesting about George III is she was carrying 200 transports, 200 convicts who had been sentenced to be transported from England to Tasmania, that the island off the southern coast of continental Australia. Transported to Tasmania, where they would be made to labor, right? And there was this whole system of convict transports, that is to say, people who were sentenced to transportation. Transports were usually people convicted of minor crimes, usually crimes born out of poverty, things like theft, often, theft of food. And the British Empire realized that these guys were could be turned to the empire's benefit by using them as forced labor. And for the first while, the North American colonies were a popular destination to send these poor people to go conduct forced labor at gunpoint for the benefit of the empire. But after the American Revolution, the Brits, for some reason, didn't want to send us more people. So instead, Australia became a major destination. And in fact, the first British ship to arrive and settle in Tasmania at a place called Hobart actually had convicts aboard her. So from the word go, Tasmania's white settlers included transports. And the deal was that that these transports would be placed in barracks guarded by soldiers, and they would go out in chain gangs and build roads, clear forest, construct buildings, do all of the nasty hard work of constructing an empire. And then once their time was up, they were freed. And most of them then chose to remain in the place where they had been sent, but as free settlers rather than as forced laborers. By the time period we're talking about, 1835, the chain gang and work camp system was much less common. That was really largely used as a punishment for convicts who demonstrated so-called bad behavior, like, for example, not wanting to work for no pay in the hot Australian sun. For the most part, transports were handed over to free white settlers to use as free labor, and they would labor for free for people who were in Tasmania. And this system was, of course, rife with abuse because while legally people who held transports could not whip or beat them, they just had to tell the local colonial authorities, like, hey, this guy acted up. And the colonial authorities would just take them at their word and then go ahead and whip the hides right off the transports just on their master's say so. And then when the end of a transport's term was coming up, often their masters would lie and say, like, oh no, he was doing bad behavior, which extends the duration of your sentence, and meant that the masters could keep this free labor longer. Of course, the system does have a lot in common with slavery. It is not slavery. I want to be crystal clear on that. It has a number of very important differences from particularly from American chattel slavery. For example, these convicts remained legal persons. They retained the rights and advantages that come with being an actual person. Their terms at labor would almost certainly end in their lifetimes. And if it didn't, it would presumably because of a death due to accident. And their children did not inherit their condition. So, these are incredibly important differences from chattel slavery, but nonetheless, it is a slave-like condition, and it's really bad. And, just something worth calling out there. But so to get the transports from England to, in this case, Tasmania, they had to be carried on ship. And these transport ships were kind of famously unreliable. They were operated by owners who, would try to squeeze as much money out of these contracts as they could. And if that meant, hey, it occurs to me I can make a little money by not spending all the money that the government gave me to provide food for my transports, just buy less food, then, you can go ahead and do that. And so George III was a pretty typical transport ship. She carried, in this voyage in 1835, she carried 308 souls. 200 of those were convicts, all male. 40 of those were children, so 40 of them were boys. The remaining 108 souls were the crew, the soldiers who guarded the convicts, and some of the soldiers brought families with them. And there were also 2 doctors. So the voyage of the George III was kind of plagued by bad happenings. So first, it just had really nasty weather on the trip south through the Atlantic, which was particularly nasty for the convicts because they were not permitted up on deck. They were down in the hold in a literal cage, like where normally cargo would be stored on one of these ships. Instead, George III had a giant iron cage where all 200 convicts had to sit in the cage with, cold water dripping down on them, no movement of air. And, these aren't sailors, so they're not accustomed to the bad weather. So they're throwing up all over each other. And there's not really any easy way to clean the vomit up, which, of course, only makes people throw up on each other more. It's really not what you might call a great situation. And then once they got out of the cold North Atlantic, the ship becomes kind of trapped in the unreliable zone of winds near the equator, where sometimes it's very stormy, sometimes there's no wind at all, and there's kind of no way to predict it ahead of time. So George III gets trapped windless down there, and it's at this point where people start catching scurvy. When I say people, I want to be clear, I'm referring to only the convicts. The other folks aboard the ship absolutely had more than enough provisions to keep them from getting scurvy. Scurvy, of course, is a disease caused by not getting enough vitamin C in your diet. And in 1835, the way you got vitamin C was fresh fruits and vegetables. And there just weren't enough fruits and vegetables aboard ship to provide plenty for the 108 souls who were not convicts, and also provide them to the 200 convicts. This, of course, is trivially easy to cure. In 1835, everybody understood you cure scurvy, not just treat, you cure scurvy. It goes right away by getting some fresh fruits and vegetables into somebody. The ship could have stopped in Cape Town. It could have stopped in Rio de Janeiro. But it didn't. The captain did not want to delay, and so people just started dying of scurvy, a super duper preventable disease. And then there was a fire. Then there was a fire aboard ship, and that's super bad. And on any ship, right? I was in the Navy. To this day, all U.S. Navy sailors are trained as firefighters. Every last one of us. Because fire is just about the worst thing that can happen aboard ship. Because when your house is on fire on land, you can leave your house. When your ship is on fire, there is nowhere to go. So the ship is on fire. This is super duper bad. This was considered bad enough that the convicts were released from their cage so that they could help put out the fire. The calculus seemed to be, look, maybe they'll mutiny. Maybe they'll take over the ship. But it's better to be alive on a mutinied ship run by convicts than to be dead in the middle of the ocean. So they released them. The kind of the high point, the high drama moment from the ship fire was when the fire reached the powder magazine. The ship had a powder magazine because it had all these soldiers with all this military equipment with them. The powder was being stored not in these big wooden barrels. It was being stored in these copper kegs, which on the one hand is great because it's a lot harder to accidentally set off the powder via something like, the ship being on fire. So that's great. The downside is all of these copper kegs were super duper hot to the touch because they were surrounded by fire. So two convicts broke into the powder magazine and started grabbing these red hot kegs and hurling them overboard before they could explode. The fire managed to get under control. These two convicts who saved the lives of everyone aboard the ship through their heroic action got horribly burned, and their reward was to die of scurvy. Because they were weakened by their burns. They were among the first to die of scurvy. That's really optimal A+. Continuing on, as George III was passing through the Indian Ocean, she encountered a terrible storm that swept away much of her superstructure. So that's really bad. And then finally, she reaches Australia. She's limping around the southern tip of Tasmania. She's bound for Hobart, the capital of Tasmania. She's going to disgorge her human cargo, many of whom by this point are dead. It's nighttime. The captain has to make a decision about which of two routes to take to get into Hobart. Really, seriously, they are hours away from Hobart at this point. The captain makes a decision which was eminently reasonable. I'm not faulting the decision. He chose to go left instead of right, and by all the charts that he had available to him, that's a totally reasonable call. What no one had any way to know was that there was a rock, a submerged rock, in that path, not marked on any charts. It had not been discovered. George III was about to discover it by smashing right into the rock. of course, that is the very moment, as soon as she smashes into the rock and starts taking on water, that's the moment when a previously fairly still night suddenly becomes stormy because Murphy's Law. And the water is rushing into the hold down below, where there are, by this point, fewer than 200 men and boys trapped in an iron cage who have no way to escape, right? And they are going to drown, and they understand that, and they start to riot. And desperate men are capable of things that not desperate men would not have thought possible. Some of them manage to bend the bars enough to begin to escape. The soldiers up on deck panic. They start shooting down into the mass of men down in the hold, killing some of them. The two doctors that managed to intervene, like, hey, maybe we should stop shooting at each other right now. Maybe what these guys down there are doing is reasonable. Things are calmed down. The ship's boats are lowered. The convicts are released from their cage. But the convicts are told, look, we're going to get as many people to shore as we can in these boats. And these boats are going to start making trips back and forth between the ship and shore. But you guys are last on the list. You guys are absolutely last on the list. Good luck. And the convicts seem to have taken this news well. They did not try to rush the boats or anything like that. And in the end, 138 of the surviving 200, 138 of them drowned. This was a big kerfuffle back in London. It led to a parliamentary inquiry, which was one of our best sources of evidence for the details of what happened here, is people's testimony at the parliamentary inquiry. The inquiry was almost entirely focused on the shots fired by the soldiers. Little attention seems to have been paid to the scurvy, which killed far more people than the soldiers did, and also was, again, super duper duper preventable. And then there was just a new crisis that blew up, and everybody kind of forgot about the George III, and kind of nothing happened. No changes were instituted. No substantive changes were instituted. For me, the wreck of the George III is a really interesting template for a sea voyage at your table, because so for one thing, a number of very interesting things happen along the way. It's a very interesting situation. There's no reason why in your fictional campaign setting, whether it's, in space or in fantasy world or whatever, why a ship carrying convicts on their way to a forced labor camp can't also take passengers. So, the PCs can go aboard as passengers. And then a number of very interesting things happen. And then, and this is, I think, what makes it most useful at the gaming table, you have the spaceship strikes an asteroid or whatever, and, all these very interesting things happen at the end. But if the PCs manage to get off the ship safely, they're at their destination. Right? Like, this isn't something that's going to totally derail your campaign because, your PCs were sailing for China and they wound up in India because the ship sank halfway through. Like, no, the ship sank less than a day's journey away from the actual destination. They're basically there. And I think that's really useful from a gaming perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And there is so much, like you said, it's just an interesting template because there are so many things that happen along the way that that you could play with. I was just wondering, it's just a thought experiment. What if you're at the beginning of the campaign, do you make the players like some of the convicts?
So that is something that a template that I got introduced to by Dark Sun, where the D&D campaign of Dark Sun has, instead of the default thing being, you meet because you're all at a tavern, for Dark Sun, the default is you meet because you are all enslaved people in the same slave caravan and you all escape together. And I think that's a fabulous way to get the party together. It's interesting. It's memorable. It gives them a very strong reason to want to work together. Again, here, it gives them kind of a forged in fire thing to get everybody on the same team. I think that's fabulous.
Yeah, I do as well. I think you can go a lot of different ways with this, and there's just so many interesting situations. But yeah, I think that would be great. And like you said, it works It works in fantasy. It works in space. You could probably figure out how to make it work in Call of Cthulhu as well. I don't, but it's just really a fascinating situation. So thank you for sharing that one. And hopefully, keeping with your theme, as you said, we're going to keep the first one short. We'll move on then to the Pirate King of Iceland, which is like one of the coolest titles ever. I mean, it's just so cool. What were you? I was the Pirate King of Iceland. You know,
you got me there.
Oh, that's really cool. So yeah, I can't do anything to beat that. So what do we have going on here, Tristan?
So when I say Pirate King of Iceland, I'm sure many of you guys' mind is like, oh, he's going to be talking about like a Viking or something. Nope. Our story here is set in the year 1809 in the middle of the Napoleonic Wars. So what we've got here is a guy by the name of Jorgen Jorgensen. He is a Dane. And the country of Denmark, Norway, the two countries are not distinct at this point. Denmark, Norway is involved in the Napoleonic Wars. And Jorgen Jorgensen, he is a lifelong sailor, right? He's a lifelong merchant sailor. I mentioned Hobart a few times, the town of Hobart. Jorgen Jorgensen actually helped found the city of Hobart. He was on that first ship I mentioned that arrived in Hobart. He was one of the sailors aboard her. So he'd been all over the world. He'd been doing all the sailor stuff. And he returns to Denmark. In 1807, Britain blockades Copenhagen. Denmark, Norway at this point is on the side of Napoleon. Britain's like, that means you're our enemy. We're going to blockade Copenhagen. So in retaliation for this, Jorgensen becomes a privateer, and somebody on Reddit got real butthurt that I, said that like, this guy's a pirate. No, he's a privateer. This is an incredibly important distinction. Like, go blow your head, buddy. It's the same damn thing. So
one of them sanctioned, Tristan. No, I'm not going to start.
Yeah, right.
No,
I'm sure that the folks who are about to be murdered by these people pursuing money are just real concerned that oh, well, at least Denmark says this guy's okay. That makes all the difference.
He has a letter from the king, so that makes it all better.
Yeah, that makes it totally morally justifiable. Like, yeah, man, whether we're talking about the commerce raiders like the CSS Alabama, or even for that matter, the founder of the United States Navy, John Paul Jones, like, yeah, man, like it's the same thing. Anyway, this is a total aside.
Yes.
So Jorgensen, he starts working as a pirate, and he gets captured. He gets captured by the Brits as part of his actions. But why he is. He's an officer on this pirate ship. And so he is a gentleman. And unlike his crew, who gets stuffed into a prison hulk where they have to wait out the rest of the war, he is permitted to wander throughout England because he is a gentleman, and he has given his word that he's not going to leave England. And that's good enough for all involved. And in the process of wandering throughout England, he meets a bunch of important people, including a merchant by the name of Samuel Phelps. And Samuel Phelps has this scheme. He's going to help a bunch of people, and he's going to make a lot of money doing it. And what he's going to do is he's going to sell a bunch of food in Iceland. Iceland at this point is owned by Denmark, Norway. So it is enemy territory. And Denmark, Norway has imposed these laws upon Iceland that make it illegal for ships that are not Danish or Norwegian to stop in Iceland, which means that if Iceland wants to import food, they have to do it from Denmark, Norway, and they are a teeny tiny market. So there's not really a lot of reason for anybody in Denmark, Norway to sail a ship out to Iceland with food. So the Icelanders are just starving, right? Like, hey, sorry, you're just going to starve now. Sure, sucks to be an Icelander, I guess. And Phelps, this British merchant, is like, I bet I could sail a ship to Iceland and we could sell the food in Iceland, and they're really desperate, so they'll pay top dollar for it. And we'll also be helping people, so it'll be a cool venture. Jorgen Jorgensen, my friend whom I've just met, you are a daring fellow. Would you like to come along with me? Would you like to be my bold pirate as we sail to Iceland? Jorgensen says, well, that would be a violation of my parole, but also I'm a pirate, so I really actually don't care about things like parole. So off they go to Iceland, and they show up in Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland, only to find that Phelps has greatly miscalculated, because Reykjavik is a city, in scare quotes, of 300 people. And the 300 people are, for the most part, not Icelanders. They're Danes. They're the merchants. They're the middlemen. They're the people who are trying to grow wealthy off this Danish law that is starving the Icelanders in further inland. And they want nothing to do with Phelps and Jorgensen. But Phelps and Jorgensen are here. They manage to apply some pressure. The Reykjavik merchants grudgingly acquiesce. They do agree to break the law after a while, after a long time. They reluctantly agree to break the law. They do buy food from Phelps. But they buy it at prices low enough that Phelps does not make any money. And so Phelps and Jorgensen return home with their tails between their legs. But Phelps is not done. Phelps says, aha, here's what we're going to do next time. We are going to return with cannons. So they get a new ship, called the Margaret and Anne. They return with a ship named Margaret and Anne, which has cannons aboard her, and they sail right into the harbor, and they say, we're back, we have more food, you're going to buy it at more reasonable prices this time. Unfortunately for them, someone else is also back, and that is the Danish governor of Iceland, a guy named Count Tramp, who was away previously. And Count Tramp is like, absolutely not. Nobody's buying anything from these guys. I am the Danish governor here. Danish law will be upheld. Definitely not. And so Phelps and Jorgensen are kind of an impasse, because they have all these guns, but nobody's willing to go against Count Tramp and buy from them. So Jorgensen, a pirate, says, aha, I have the perfect solution. And he waits until Sunday. And then on Sunday, he gets some sailors from the Margaret and Anne. He hands them rifles. He marches to the governor's mansion. There's nobody in the streets because it's Sunday. Everybody's in church. He stations half of his sailors in front of the governor's mansion and half of them behind the governor's mansion, and tells them, hey, if anybody comes out of the governor's mansion without my say-so, shoot them. Just kill them. Sailors say, okay, roger that. Jorgensen walks into the governor's mansion. He's got a brace of pistols in fine pirate fashion. And it finds Count Tramp lounging on a sofa, too important to go to church. And he says, guess what, Count Tramp? You're under arrest. You're coming with me. And he marches Count Tramp out of the mansion and imprisons him aboard the good ship Margaret and Anne. And nobody does anything about it because everybody's in church. So nobody notices that this has happened. And this is a revolution, right? Like, and Jorgensen publicly declares himself the new king of an independent Iceland, based largely on the fact that he has guns and nobody else seems to have any guns. So I'm in charge now. And this revolution has concluded without anyone firing a shot. This is a totally bloodless revolution. So first he declares, hey, the law against buying from Margaret and Anne is repealed. Everybody should start buying our food. And then he starts issuing these really interesting decrees. And some of these decrees are pretty clearly intended to make him more popular with the Icelanders, right? To kind of justify his rule, make him a popular king so that they will much prefer to be ruled by this guy who is actually here and seems to care about us, as opposed to those Danes in faraway Copenhagen who just want us to starve. So he declares that all debts to Danes are void. Icelanders, if they are in debt to any Danes, they do not have to pay those debts. He increases the pay the Icelandic clergy. The idea being now the clergy will like him more. And so when they stand up in the pulpit on Sunday, they will say nice things about him. And then there's other things that he passes where he's clearly trying to model himself on kind of an American or French revolutionary or, Lockean, like, we're moving in the direction of freedom and the rights of man and equality and all these good democratic principles. And he's kind of starting out in this style, lots of references to democracy and liberty. But over the next months, he starts to get a lot more monarchical. He declares himself, and I'm quoting here, His Excellency, the Protector of Iceland, Commander-in-Chief by land and sea. He's wrapping himself in the robes of kingship. It's very much like France under Napoleon, except instead of happening slowly over the course of many years, this is happening in an eye blink, right? Like, this is one of those things where, like, you leave your house in Reykjavik in the morning and it's like, oh, are we more a king today than we were a democracy yesterday? Isn't that interesting? 2 months after Jorgensen declares himself king, a British warship rolls into Reykjavik, HMS Talbot. I was not able to find out whether the Talbot was chasing Jorgensen, who, remember, is in violation of his parole, or whether they were just pulling into this enemy port for some unrelated reason. I don't know. But regardless, the captain of the Talbot sees an escaped British POW who has just knocked over the royal power of Denmark, Norway, and declared himself king. And this captain is, I think, somewhat understandably, freaked out by this, right? He is a loyal servant of King George III. The idea that some POW could just roll in and be like, haha, there's a new king, a little distressing for this guy. And he arrests Jorgensen. He puts Count Tramp back in charge. It seems like at some point Count Tramp may have been able to sneak off the Margaret and Anne and go over to HMS Talbot to talk to this British captain. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not 100% sure that happened. That could have just been a spurious turn of phrase in one of the sources. But if it did happen, I'm not entirely sure how it went about happening. Win, lose, or draw, Jorgensen is under arrest. He is taken back to Britain. The Margaret and Anne no longer has any reason to be in Reykjavik. She has sold all of her food. She has purchased new stores, largely of things like oil and tallow. And there's no more reason for her to be sitting in the harbor when her previous reason was to have lots of cannons and be in the harbor so no one's going to try anything funny, see? So she also returns to England, and she is barely away from shore when all of that tallow and oil spontaneously catches fire aboard her. And Jorgensen, though a prisoner, leads a bold and daring rescue in one of the small boats from the Talbot to rescue everyone from Margaret and Anne. He is brought back to Britain. He does some other crimes, right? Like, I don't think this is if I'm remembering this right, this isn't like the last crime he commits, namely breaking parole. But ultimately, at some point, he commits his final crime and is sentenced to transportation, and is loaded aboard a ship and sent to Hobart, the town he helped found, and so I called him the Pirate King of Iceland, and I think that's a better name. But interestingly, if you look him up, you'll often see him referred to by the title the Convict King of Tasmania, because he died in Tasmania, a convict and a former king. So I think this is a really remarkable. It's just a remarkable instant, right? Like, this random POW shows up. It's like, I'm king now. But also, like, from a gaming perspective, there's a couple different ways you can handle it. I can't get away from the fact that Jorgensen sure acts a lot like a PC, right? Like he shows up places out of the blue. He is convinced of his own greatness and importance. He seems to be the main character in the story wherever he goes. And his wacky and wild schemes sure do seem to work out in ways that you wouldn't expect. So, like, I would lean into that. I would have if the party is already going to some starving backwater dependency, like maybe just start dropping some hints like, hey, it sure looks like everybody's at the festival. There's nobody out in the streets, but you went to the festival and you didn't see the governor at the festival. So I'm just saying, yeah, I would lean into this. I would present this as an opportunity. Like, would you like to Jorgensen? If so, let's try some rolls. But then also he makes a great complication. I'm a big fan of complications. Yeah. You've got a pretty straightforward plot, right? Like the PCs have to go to town X and do thing Y. It's all very straightforward, and you're like, oh man, I don't have a full gaming session's worth of material here. Yeah, throw in a complication. Like something happens that makes that more difficult. Don't just throw extra obstacles like, ooh, sorry, before you can convince person Y, you first have to convince person Z. Yeah. Like, it's much more interesting if something unrelated occurs that makes the straightforward thing harder to accomplish. It's not another obstacle. It's not another hurdle in your hurdle race. It's something totally unrelated. And Jorgensen is a great example of such a complication. You're in some second-rate backwater dependency, doing something straightforward, and this guy just rolls in and declares he's king. And so, and it causes problems. Now the spaceport is off limits. Now the guy that you were here to talk to is under arrest. What do you do, right? How do you handle this? And yeah, I think Jorgensen is a fabulous complication.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a number of ways you could use it. I did like your characterization of him as a PC, because he does seem to have a bit of that flair about him there that some role players certainly pick up on. And yeah, and the complication angle is great as well. Instead of just saying, yeah, like, oh, well, you can't get the information from this guy, but he directs you to somebody else. You can definitely throw him into the mix, and it's just like you wake up and it's just like, oh, well, the port is now under the control of his grace or whatever, his excellency, so and so, and you're just like, what? He just came in with a merchant ship and a few extra cannons. What happened here? What happened? So I think that's great. And then also, yeah, the Convict King of Tasmania is a great title as well. So, I mean, this is just rife with great titles for some fascinating figures. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, as we have gotten those covered, we can switch over here. And you were worried about this situation being a kind of a long one, but we're going to talk about a disastrous game.
Yeah, so this game is called Buzkashi. It is a Central Asian horse sport. So you can kind of think of it as like, oh, polo, right? Polo is a horse sport. But this is a pretty wild horse sport. It's played in a scrum with thousands of mounted players, lots of pushing and shoving. Instead of a ball and hammers, there is a decapitated calf carcass. It's amazing, and we're specific. So we're going to talk about a specific game of Buzkashi that happened in 1977.
And very modern. Is this the most modern? Is this the most modern topic we've covered?
Probably the most modern topic we've covered on the show. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Cool. All right. Great.
This specific game is super gameable. So first off, some definitions. So we're going to be talking about a game that occurred in Kunduz province in northern Afghanistan, kind of just before the communist takeover of the country. And this is to this day, right? Like not just in 1977, to this day, this is an area where one of the most powerful institutions is that of the Khan. And Khan here, yes, the term is absolutely etymologically derived from the same sources as like Genghis Khan. But in this case, it's a local big man. And a Khan might be somebody as small as like, hey, you've got this minuscule little village up in the mountains, and the local big man, the Khan, is just like the guy who owns twice as much land as everybody else. So, he's big, but he's not that big. And probably that guy, that hypothetical Khan, his influence probably extends no further than the boundaries of the village that he lives in. And Khans do not have formal authority. It's not like, if you don't listen to the Khan, the police will come. A Khan's authority exists only in as much as he is able to convince the people around him that he has influence. But on the other end of the Khan, you have these kind of national level power brokers that you see pop up in like news reporting out of Afghanistan. And, these kind of national level warlords, those guys are also Khans. And it's the same principle, right? They don't have a formal legal authority. What they have is they can convince people to do things largely by pointing at a previous record of them successfully convincing people to do things. And the Khans are really important to this game of Buzkashi because they are the sponsors. Khans like to have mini Khans. This is not a universal. It's just a game after all. But a lot of Khans like to have professional Buzkashi players on staff because it's prestigious. It demonstrates that you are someone of consequence if you have kind of a Buzkashi superstar as part of your retinue. So what the Khans do is they raise these horses, or they have people who raise horses on their behalf that are trained to be fine Buzkashi horses, and they have fine Buzkashi players who ride these fine Buzkashi horses. And these players, these are people called Chapandazan. The singular is Chapandaz. And a Chapandazan spend most of the year as like just ordinary people, right? They're farmers, they're blacksmiths, they're perfectly ordinary dudes. But in winter, when there's no farming to do, they play Buzkashi, and they play it professionally. And so I preface all this because these social systems are basically baked into the rules of Buzkashi, or at least the rules as they existed at this one particular game in Kunduz in 77. Because what the rules are is you have a big field, and you take a calf and you cut the head off the calf and you cut the hooves off the calf. And you cut the head off so that the calf balances better. It's not like weirdly falling around in an unbalanced fashion. You cut the hooves off so nobody's going to accidentally cut their hands on the hooves of the calf. And you drop the calf in the middle of the field. And then you have kind of these concentric rings of men on horseback, thousands of men on horseback. And the rings are not discrete. This is just a big scrum. But closest to the calf, you have the Chapandazan. You have the professional players. These are the real serious contenders. You may also have some people who are not Chapandazan. They do not have, they don't have Khan sponsors, but they think like, I'm going to get it, right? These are the maybe you might call them semi-pro, I guess. But if they can force their way to the center of the scrum, they're in there too. Ring beyond that, you have the Khans and their retinues, because they want to be as close as possible to the action so that they can watch, right? What am I paying all this money for if I don't get the best seats in the house? So they're, pushing their way through the scrum to get a really good view. And then beyond that, the outermost ring of the scrum is everybody else, right? Just everybody there. These are not people who are going to make a serious play for the calf carcass. They're just there because because it's an awesome sport. And like, come on, I don't have to explain sports to you. Like, people like sports. And so what happens is when the calf is dropped, a Chapandaz will force his horse to the middle of the scrum, and then he will command the horse to stand stock still while he rotates perpendicular around the horse's body so that his body is parallel to the ground, and he reaches down and grabs the calf. Conveniently, the calf has 4 handholds. We call them legs. And so he grabs one of these legs and he tries to sit back up on his horse. Meanwhile, everybody around him is commanding their horse to go in there and shove his horse aside. Horses, of course, hate this. This is not in any way fun for horses, which is why you need a specially bred and trained Buzkashi horse. So our protagonist here, right? He's back in the saddle. He's holding on to the calf. Oh no, the calf has 3 other handholds. So probably there's 3 other dudes who are also holding on to the calf, and you're all pulling on the calf and trying to get it out of each other's hands. And the calf starts migrating at this point towards the edge of the scrum, as somebody will manage to grab the calf away from other people and ride through the scrum a little bit. And then probably somebody else will grab the calf out of his hands. And, at some point the calf will get dropped and the calf will get picked back up. And, there'll be moments where like 3 different people are riding, hell for leather while all holding onto the calf at the same time. But this is not a team sport. They can't all win. And the winning condition is you get free and clear from the scrum, right? Like, you are well separated from the scrum. Nobody can be like, oh, he's still in the scrum. And you drop the calf and nobody else is holding onto the calf when you drop it. And if you do that, you have won the round. And of course, that's just one round, right? Like the game is played all day for multiple days in a row. But if you drop the calf, then there's a crier. There's somebody whose job it is to like announce what's going on. The crier will ride up to you and he'll just right on the spot compose a song praising in order here in decreasing order of importance, praising first the Khan, who in whose service the Chapandaz rode, praising second the horse on which the Chapandaz rode, and third the heroism of the Chapandaz himself, and announcing the cash prize that the Chapandaz just won. And typically, the Khan sponsor will then match the cash prize to the Chapandaz. Like I said, these guys are professionals; they have to be compensated. The nature of the cash prize escalates over the course of the match. And it's the crier's job to announce the current status of the cash prize. So at first you'll be like, oh, the cash prize is this many Afghanis, the local currency. Okay, well, people be willing to try for it, but it's not really, Buzkashi is a dangerous game. It is not worth risking your health over a small amount of money. But as the match goes along, the crier starts calling out bigger and bigger and bigger amounts of money. And now people are willing to play for keeps. And as the amount gets bigger, people start shoving each other off their horses. You don't want to throw a punch. Throwing a punch turns this into a whole different game that nobody involved here wants to play. That is a dangerous game. But, the game gets more interesting and more aggressive the higher the amount of money goes. And as the match progresses and people get progressively more and more exhausted, the amount of money only escalates. And then eventually somebody wins, the crier announces it, and some lucky Chapandaz gets a big payday, which is great for him because he does not get a lot of money from farming. So let's go back to the social context of the game, because the social context, again, like, this is a really cool sport, but it's people treat it as a sport, right? Like, this isn't some big life or death proxy for war or anything. Like, no, it's a sport. But like all sports, it has this really important social context. And in this case, I mentioned that Buzkashi is usually played all day for a series of days. So basically what it is it's a festival. And cons will sponsor festivals for important moments in their lives, right? Like, say, your son just got circumcised. That's a big moment in your life. It would be worthwhile for you to throw a festival, right? That is something worth celebrating. And if you can throw a good festival, everybody will say, wow, that guy really threw a good festival. He's clearly very important and able to get things done. Congratulations. Your prestige just went up. And because your authority extends only as far as your prestige and your reputation, that means your authority also just increased. So these festivals are also a way for cons, for big men, to extend their authority by extending their reputation. So it's serious business, even though it is, and again, I cannot stress this enough, just a game. And so, like, to what extent is this politics and to what extent is this sport will vary depending on who you're talking to. And because it's just a game, cons are under no obligation to throw Buzkashi festivals. They may throw a festival, but it's not a Buzkashi festival because this guy's just not into Buzkashi, right? He's a soccer guy. So maybe he's going to throw a multi-day soccer festival because everybody likes soccer. But so you got this con, and he wants to throw a Buzkashi festival, and he wants to throw it probably because he's very excited about Buzkashi, and probably because he's very excited about the thing that he's celebrating, and probably because he wants to extend his authority and his reputation and his influence. How's he going to go about doing that? Well, the first thing he has to do is he has to appoint an assistant, because part of the point of hosting a festival is it is an opportunity to be a host. Hosting is extraordinarily important. And in order to be a good host, in order to be a perfect host, you have to demonstrate perfect charity. Perfect charity cannot exist in the real world, right? There are only so many resources. So you have to appoint an assistant who's going to be the bad cop to your good cop. Someone who is able to step in and say, oh, sorry, I know we should do thing X, but we just can't. Because you, the host, cannot say that, or you will lose face and you will be imperfectly charitable. So you've got these two dudes. You've got the host and you've got his assistant. The assistant is probably a very close personal relative. In a best case scenario, it's your brother. We're getting back to the specific 1977 match. The host here is a dude who is super excited about Buzkashi, and who can blame him? Unfortunately, he's the wrong ethnic group. In Kunduz in 77, Buzkashi was seen as primarily an Uzbek pastime, Uzbek referring to the ethnicity, not to the nationality. And our host here was Pashtun. Now, Pashtuns were at the time, and certainly remain, fully permitted to be excited about Buzkashi, but it's not primarily a Pashtun thing, or at least it wasn't at the time. Buzkashi has become more popular among Pashtuns in the decades since. So he cannot necessarily rely on his relatives to help him out on this, because any relative that he goes to and says, hey, I'm going to host a big Buzkashi festival, can I count on your help? Right? Can I count on you to host guests in your house, to let them sleep on your floors? Can I count on you to provide food and drink to the guests who will come here for the festival? Can I count on the use of your stables to put up the horses that people will bring to play Buzkashi with? Any one of his relatives, if his relative isn't excited about Buzkashi, can just say, no, man, I'm not excited about Buzkashi. And if more Uzbeks are excited about Buzkashi than Pashtuns are, all of a sudden, his base of reliable support really diminishes. Second problem, his assistant. His assistant, also Pashtun. We've already talked about how that's a problem here. His assistant is an invalid. He's really excited about Buzkashi, and everybody likes him, right? Everybody, even the Uzbeks, are like, this guy, he's great. He's a real Buzkashi fanboy, but he can't sit a horse all day, which means that he can't serve as a referee down at the Buzkashi fields, because he just, and the source that I was using for this declined to specify what the nature of this guy's disability was. He's definitely capable of riding a horse sometimes, but he just cannot spend all day in the saddle. Well, what happens when three people get clear of the scrum and all drop the calf at the same time. And then they all turn around and claim that they are the victor. That's what the assistant is for. The assistant needs to be on hand to say, you, my friend, you are the victor. You two, better luck next time. Because the host can't say that. That would be imperfectly charitable to the two people who get rejected. You need the assistant there. You need somebody with authority there. And the assistant is there representing the host, so he has authority. But this particular assistant can't do that. He can do that sometimes, but he can't do that all the time. So that's a problem. The host, he gathers together all of basically all the steadholders of the area in his house. He says, hey, I would like to throw a Buzkashi festival. Who's in, who's out? And unfortunately, the host has overestimated the amount of sway that he has with these people. They respect him a little bit less than he thought they did. So all these guys, instead of saying, we love Buzkashi, we'd love to have a Buzkashi festival, we would be delighted to host guests in our home. We would be delighted to, open our stables, open our granaries. Instead, they say, I'm down to help, but you better make sure that the guests that I get are important. Because if you host important guests in your house, that raises your standing. Clearly, you must be someone important if the important guests are put with you. And if you get unimportant guests, that demonstrates that you are an unimportant person. So you don't want that. And if this host, if the Khan had more sway, he would be able to lean on people and be like, look, I'm sorry, buddy. Somebody's got to take the unimportant guests, and it's got to be you. These other landholders are not interested in any of this. So they start, rather than the Khan rolling out a list of invitees and saying, okay, you're going to get these guys, you're going to get those guys, you're going to get these guys are dictating to him who's going to stay in their house. That is a serious problem because it means that the final invite list is weird. There are weird omissions in it that are insulting. Because if nobody wanted to host this guy because he wasn't high status enough, but everybody knows that he's a beloved Buzkashi Khan, then it is insulting that he wasn't invited. So now we have this problem. Then everybody settles on, okay, these are the 4 days we're going to have our Buzkashi festival. And right as they're about to send out invitations to every Khan, every Chapandaz, every person of note in the surrounding provinces, an invitation arrives to them saying, hey, we know you guys like Buzkashi. Why don't you come on down to our Buzkashi festival, which is the exact same days that you were just planning to hold yours. So at the last minute, our host has to reschedule. Right, he has to reschedule his thing, but he can't move it too far to the left or the right because it is supposed to be celebrating this one specific moment. So he's able to move it, but the first day of his festival will still overlap with the last day of the other festival, which means that the first day is probably going to be pretty dead, and that's a problem. So, okay, the invitations go out. You've got a weird and possibly insulting guest list. It's happening on a time that's inconvenient and probably means that the first day of play isn't going to be very interesting. All this costs money. It is the host's responsibility to provide money to compensate the people who are providing work and food and guest lodging and so forth. Our host has money, but he is counting on receiving money from the people who show up. Right? People showing up and saying, oh, thank you so much for hosting this festival. Have this large gift. And then the Khan can say, oh, thank you so much for this large gift. Hey, I talking to a guy off to the side of me. Hey, I haven't compensated, this guy yet. Give him the gift. But people aren't showing up on the first day. Everybody's still at the other festival. So now he's not compensating the people that he promised compensation to. And that's a really bad look. And on the first day, play is not interesting or fun because there's no money for the purse, right? There's no money to reward people for winning the cow. So A, there's not a lot of chapandas on there. And B, they're not going to play very hard because they're not going to risk their health for a small purse. Continuing on the problems don't end. The problems just continue. As promised, the assistant is not able to reliably be down on the Buzkashi field to serve as a referee. But somebody has to referee. So who is selected to be the referee but the crier? Remember the crier, the guy whose job it is to be like, all right, now the prize is this big. There are advantages and disadvantages to using the crier as your referee. The thing you have to understand about the crier is that it is a very low status position. It is considered demeaning to be the crier. So the crier is a political nobody. And in fact, this particular crier is a member of yet another ethnic group, the Jogi ethnic group, which is pretty generally held in contempt by the people in this area. The advantages to this are it is actually impossible for the crier to insult anyone, right? The crier can say the worst things in the world about you and your mother, but it's not actually an insult because it's coming from a political nobody, right? Like nothing he says matters. Nobody cares. So great, you have a referee who can't insult anyone. That's great. He's not going to cause offense. On the downside, nobody respects him because he's a political nobody, which means that if he has to referee something and somebody decides to dispute his ruling, there's nothing he can do about it, right? He has no base of political support that he can say, yeah, sorry, you really got to go along with what I'm saying, because they don't have to go along with what he's saying. So this is a serious problem, and things are getting out of hand. And there is an incident on, I want to say day 2, where the calf is dropped while 4 different players still claimed that they had control of it. So now there's a 4-way dispute, and the referee is this nobody. And so you got 4 different Chapandazan yelling at each other. And then they stop yelling at each other when their con sponsors show up. And the con sponsors are yelling at each other. And meanwhile, somebody has sent word, get the assistant out here. The assistant needs to come out here. So, word has been sent, but everybody's yelling at each other. And now these cons, of course, they have lots of friends here. This is day 2. The other festival has ended. So now everyone is here. Everybody of note is here. All these guys participate in these webs of patronage and responsibility. So these guys all have friends and allies and people that they report to that they can call upon. And so this 4-way dispute is starting to escalate up the chain of command. And now it's more and more and more important people yelling at each other. And finally you get the situation where instead of 4 people yelling at each other, it's only 2. Neither of these people actually have a dog in the fight. It wasn't one of their Chapandazan, but they are 2 of the most important people at the festival, and they are yelling at each other. And things are escalating, right? Tempers are rising, and it's starting to look like, oh God, is one of these guys going to throw a punch? Right. And they've got these big retinues behind them because they're important people. So, of course, they travel with large retinues. Are some of those guys going to lose their tempers and start throwing punches? Because then things turn to blood. And ultimately, one of these 2 cons decides to bow out. He is from further away. One of these 2 cons is local. One of them is from far away. The local guy, of course, has a giant retinue because none of his retinue had to travel very far. So, of course, they could just be like, yeah, all right, honey, I'm going to be gone for 4 days. I'll see you on the other side. The other guy, he had to travel farther, so he has to travel with a smaller retinue. He doesn't like his odds, right? If this does turn into a fist fight, if knives start to be drawn, if people start shooting at each other, I'm going to lose. So you know what? I withdraw. But I'm not just going to withdraw to you know what? Maybe you were right. I concede. He's saying, no, this is a dumb party. I didn't want to be part of this festival anyway. If I'm going to lose face, I'm going to try to regain a little bit of that self-respect by just leaving the festival entirely. And that will be a major black mark against the host because it indicates that he can't keep control over his own thing, and he can't even keep control to a degree where very important people are leaving in a huff, and that's super bad. So this guy, he's leaving, and finally the assistant shows up. He's like, Khan, no, you don't have to leave. here's what we're going to do. I will duplicate the prize, right? The guy that your adversary was advocating for, he gets to keep his prize. And the guy that you were advocating for, he gets an identical prize. Cool. That resolves the situation. The guy's not storming off. He's not leaving anymore. The problem is now that has demonstrated that the assistant can be pressured into doing something like that. The assistant now has just lost an enormous amount of authority and influence in doing this. So that's really bad for the assistant. And it also reflects badly on the host because the assistant is there representing the host who is not even physically present down on the field. Because if he's physically present down on the field, he might get drawn into situations like this where he would have to demonstrate imperfect charity, which he cannot do. Meanwhile, while all this disaster is going down on the field, back in his house, the host has gotten into a screaming match with one of his guests, a very important guest, a screaming match about something totally unrelated to Buzkashi. And so things get bad enough where in a fit of passion, the host takes the gift that guest has offered him. And the gift is a whole bunch of bills, right? It's paper money. And he throws it into his guest's lap to demonstrate, I don't want your stupid gift. You are not welcome. And with enormous dignity, the guest stands up and he brushes the bills out of his lap and says, well, since my gift has been returned, first off, I do not accept the return. I gave it in good faith. I'm not taking it back. That would be very rude. Since my gift has been returned, I no longer have any obligation to be here. Goodbye. And he walks out. And immediately the people start swarming this guy, trying to be like, no, you don't need to leave. Partially because they are good friends of the host, and it's going to look really bad if this guy storms out. And partially because if they do manage to mediate this dispute, it will look super good on them, and they will gain reputation as somebody who can solve problems. But it's to no avail. This guy storms out. It looks super duper bad. And on day 4, day 4 is just totally unremarkable. There's no money for the gifts. Everything is weird. Everybody really likes Buzkashi, so they are kind of just staying, but the general agreement is this is bad Buzkashi, right? Because people aren't playing very hard. There's all this weird social dynamic going on. By day 4, a compromise has been reached for the referee instead of the crier being the referee, which has not worked out. Instead, now there are 2 referees, one Pashtun, one Uzbek, so nobody can be accused of favoritism towards their ethnic group. And mercifully, both of the appointed refugees are good, impartial referees. They never disagree with one another, which could turn very ugly if there were 2 referees and they disagreed. But it's a bad scene. And everybody at the end of day 4, they leave. The festival is over, and everyone agrees this was a disaster. This was a disastrous festival. It doesn't make the host stop being a Khan. What it does do is mean that his star will advance no further. If being a Khan is all about being able to demonstrate your ability to make things happen, right? You can get people to do things because you have demonstrated in the past that you can get people to do things. The Khan has demonstrated he is unable to handle a thing of this level of complexity, which means that he has become as influential of a Khan as he can be. And for the rest of his life, he becomes no more influential, no more powerful. His reputation extends no further. It is capped by the incident at this festival. So from a gaming perspective, what we have here is a really cool sport with a fascinating political element to it. Mm-hmm. So you can have, in your fictional campaign setting, in your fictional campaign setting, you can invent a sport that looks suspiciously similar to Buzkashi, and your PCs can be invited to a festival. If your party is important, then of course they will receive an invitation. All important people receive invitations. If your party is not important, well, then somebody important invites them along as part of their retinue, right? Mm. And so they show up, and Or we just talked about complications. This also makes a great complication. You were planning to do something in town anyway, and you show up and, oh my God, there's this Buzkashi festival going on. Yes. Everything's going to be so much more complicated. But the PCs that can compete in the Buzkashi for cash prizes, and doing so, congratulations. The game is inherently political, though if you ask anybody in the game, they will deny it and they will say, no, it's just a game. But guess what it is? And that's, for the record, that's a perspective that comes from the author of the text that I was pulling from, who's basically like, yeah, as soon as I started asking people, they're like, oh, no, it's just a game. But you get to know these people for 5 years and you ask them the same question again. They're like, oh, it's totally not just a game. It's just something you have to say. So in competing for the cash prizes, guess what? You are getting embroiled in local politics. You have just made enemies. You have just made friends. When you yank the calf out of the hands of a Chapandaz, like, guess what? Not only does that guy now not like you very much, his Khan doesn't like you very much, because the Khan could have gotten a boost in his influence by saying, oh, look, my Chapandaz, just won a really hard-fought match. I'm very cool by association. But the Chapandaz didn't win that match, so guess what? You now have an enemy. But on the other hand, his rivals now think you're super cool, so now you have friends. There's all this business. Maybe the PCs might get tapped to be referees, particularly if they're outsiders, because they don't have a dog in the fight. These guys are political nobodies. But just like with the crier, if they're nobodies, great, you can't cause offense. That's wonderful. But now it's going to be really hard for them to impose their will on a bunch of NPCs who don't respect them. If the PCs are somebody, if they do have a little legitimacy, maybe they've had some exploits in the past, and the folks who live here have heard about these exploits and like, ooh, those are the guys who did that one thing with the spaceship. These people are cool. Then doing well in a Buzkashi festival could be a great way to get a little more influence. And I don't necessarily just mean on the field, though on the field counts, but also like, what if when that Khan is storming off, can you successfully intercede with him? If you can convince him that maybe he doesn't need to storm off and this is all a big misunderstanding, then ta-da, your reputation just benefited, just like with the people who tried to do that in real life. And hey, if you got combat-oriented NPCs, always the chance that this festival will turn into a brawl, right? Always. And this is nuts, right? Like, this whole festival thing is amazing, and I love it, and I think it is super duper duper gameable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much in there. Obviously, there's so much in the story that you could go so many ways. Like you were just saying, like, the players could compete in it. They could be referees. They could try to have to get influence, gain influence by participating in it so they can gain the favor of somebody for something they need. I mean, I would also think that maybe they could possibly need something from the host, but he tells them that his festival is kind of unraveling, so he needs their help in some way.
That would be amazing. Oh my God, I can't believe I didn't think of that. That's perfect. Like, yeah, we would be delighted to we, the Royal We, would be delighted to offer you the help that you have come here seeking. But boy, I got this much higher priority thing going on right now. So if you can make my festival fly right, I will be in your debt and you will absolutely get the thing you came here for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do even love the angle of, like, they're having to travel to this town to like do something. And there's just like 10,000 people on horseback in this, in this field, and you're just like, what is happening here? Like,
yeah, like you're here to steal a diamond, right? Yes. Like, oh yeah, the host is famous for this giant diamond. You're like, oh yeah, we're gonna steal this diamond. This is gonna be great. And you show up, and it's like, there are 10,000 very angry horsemen like shoving each other off of horses in a field. If this goes badly for us, it's going to go really badly.
Yeah, and the diamond is kept in the tower that the Khan looks at the festival out of, or over something.
Absolutely.
You're just like, oh my gosh! Even if we get in there, he's there, and if we get out, there's 10,000 horsemen who can just like track us down like instantly and win some kind of big political favor with everybody that that they're looking for or whatever. I think it's just awesome. I think you could go so many different ways with it. It's so cool. Yeah. Well, Tristan, I mean, I don't know how the new format kept things shorter or not, but we kind of still went along. But I mean, there's so much gameable material here. Why don't you just remind everybody, where can they find your writing, your history, articles, and your games?
Yeah, so if you like content like this, head over to moltensulfur.com, where I maintain the Molten Sulfur blog, or just Google Molten Sulfur blog, Molten Sulfur RPG. And every Tuesday, I put out content pulled from real history and folklore, and explain how you can file the serial numbers off of it, drop it into your the campaign you're already running. And then also, while you're there, you can learn more about Shanty Hunters, my award-winning tabletop RPG about collecting magical sea shanties. Hope you enjoy.
Yeah, and of course, for anybody who is listening, I'll be sure to drop some links into the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. So if you're listening right now, you can head over there, find some links to Molten Sulfur and to Shanty Hunters and all of that. Well, Tristan, it was just a pleasure to have you back on. Can't wait for the next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, guys, there you have it. I really hope you enjoyed my conversation with Tristan today. As always, you can hop into the show notes over at dicegeeks.com, and you will find links to Tristan's blog and to his award-winning role-playing games. All right, now, if you want some free stuff, head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You will get several PDFs that will help you in your games, and also you will be subscribed to my email list where I send out email updates every Friday letting you know what is going on here in the wild world of Dice Geeks. You know, guys, I really appreciate you listening to the show. I thank you so much. If you would like to support the show in some way, you can like, rate, review, subscribe. You can also support the show financially on patreon.com/dicegeeks. All right, now, guys, until next Wednesday, keep gaming.